Well, as we are here on, really the end of August, which is kind of hard to believe the summer's gone already. But, here at the end of August, we look ahead to the fall holy days, and in just 3 weeks we'll be back here, the weekly Sabbath, of course, but we'll be gathered together here for the Feast of Trumpets. And the Feast of Trumpets has some real meaning as we enter into the holy day season. We know that ultimately Jesus Christ is going to return. He's going to set up his kingdom. But before that, there's going to be a time of trouble, that is on this earth that is kind of harrowing to think about. When you read the words the first time in the Bible of what the world will go through between now and then, it can be kind of eye-opening, and it can kind of be in a little way terrifying to know what this world is going to go through. But ultimately and finally, we keep our eyes on the return of Jesus Christ. That will occur at that seventh trump that the Feast of Trumpets pictures, and then the putting away of Satan, and ultimately the millennial reign of Jesus Christ that will come upon that, where all mankind will finally learn what it's like to live under righteous law and to know what true peace, what true harmony, what true unity with God and creation is. So we look forward to that time, and we'll talk about those things more as we get to the holy days. But today I want to look at one aspect of the return of Jesus Christ. But I want to start back in Ezekiel with a verse that is just one of those verses that you read and God can put pictures into words that just kind of make us stop and think. So turn with me back to Ezekiel 3. You've been following along in the local Bible reading program. You read this and probably read the commentary on it as well. But let's look at it, Ezekiel 3 and verse 3, as God is speaking to Ezekiel. Well, let's begin in verse 1. Let's just begin right at the beginning of the chapter in Ezekiel 3. Verse 1, it says, "Moreover, God, said to Ezekiel, Son of man, eat what you find. Eat the scroll, and go speak to the house of Israel." And you remember that the house of Israel had already been taken into captivity and had lost their land 100 years before this. "Go and speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth," Ezekiel says, "and God caused me to eat that scroll. And he said to me, Son of man, feed your belly, and feed your stomach, or fill your stomach with this scroll that I give you. So I ate, and it was in my mouth like honey in sweetness." And then as you go down through the verses, you see God talking about the people, how they have rejected him, what Ezekiel is going to do, the prophecies that will come against these people, that it isn't a pretty picture, yet this book was really sweet in his mouth as he ate it. Let's drop down to verse 14. It says, "So the Spirit lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness. It tasted sweet when I tasted it, but I went away in bitterness, in the heat of my spirit. But the hand of the Eternal was strong upon me. And I came to the captives at Tel Aviv, who dwelt by the river Chebar, and I sat where they sat, and remained there astonished among them 7 days." The vision that Ezekiel saw, it just kind of floored him. It just stopped him in his track. He needed 7 days to kind of take it all in. You know how that is when you get some news or something happens to you, and usually it's not something good, it's something that you didn't expect, something that's just awful, and you're kind of in a state of shock for a while, but then you just have to kind of absorb it all and think, what has happened? What has gone on? How do I deal with all of this? And that was what Ezekiel found himself in after this vision. When he initially ate it, it was really sweet, but when he really saw what the vision was, he sat astonished for 7 days as it sank in what was going to happen, what it was like. As you read that verse, you probably thought of another verse that's in the New Testament. It's in Revelation, and it's there on the screen behind you. In Revelation 9, John had a similar experience as God had him in vision of what was going to happen at the end time. In Revelation 10, it says, "I went," John speaking, or writing, "so I went to the angel and said to him, 'Give me that little book.' And he said to me, 'Take and eat it, and it will make your stomach bitter, but it will be as sweet as honey in your mouth.' I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it, and it was as sweet as honey in my mouth. But when I had eaten it, my stomach became bitter. And he said to me, 'You must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings.'" There was a message that needed to go out to all of the world about what was going to happen. Because as Ezekiel and John ate that little book, as they ate that little scroll, what they saw initially was the kingdom of God, Jesus Christ returning, a perfect world to live in, peace, joy, happiness, love, everything you could imagine that is good on earth a beautiful vision of what God is going to happen. And it's as sweet as honey in your mouth. But when he digested it, when he saw the whole prophecy, when he saw what was going to happen leading up to that time, it was bitter. It was bitter. It was hard to swallow. It was hard to think about those things happening to the people that he was living with then, the people that we live and work with, go to school with, and all the things we do with them every day. The prophecies that Jesus Christ told, the prophecies that are in the book of Revelation, the prophecies that are in the book of Daniel. Tough things to think about. But at the end, it's very sweet. And so Ezekiel experienced that. John experienced it probably as we began understanding the truth of God. We experienced it too. And maybe even today we look at what is going to happen between now and the return of Jesus Christ, and it can be harrowing thoughts. And if we relied on ourselves to see, to get us through now until then, we would fail. Well, we know with the grace of God and with the strength of God and His Holy Spirit, He will see us through. You know, when Jesus Christ returns, there is something He is returning to. Back in Luke 1, at the time before He was born, and Mary was carrying Him, or actually even before she was carrying Him, a prophecy was told about Jesus Christ, that He would be born and what He would be doing ultimately. In Luke 1 and verse 31, Luke 1 verse 31, it says, "Behold, you," speaking to Mary, "will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus. He will be great, and will be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." When He returns, He'll set up His kingdom, and God will give Him the throne of His father David, and that will be the throne He sits on. Now, if you ask many people in the world, what is the throne that Jesus Christ is going to return to, they don't know. They will tell you He'll be the throne that He sets up when He returns. But He says He'll give Him the throne of His father David when He returns. Today I want to talk about that throne that Jesus Christ will return to, that we'll be picturing His return here in the next, as we go into the Feast of Trumpets, because that throne figures prominently in the history of God's people, back in the Old Testament and for us today. Let's go back to Genesis 49. Genesis 49. Now, as you've read through the book of Jeremiah and now Ezekiel, that throne figures prominently in those books as well. It's talked about there. It was something that was cherished by the people back then. And that throne, or at least the last king of Jerusalem, or the king of Judah, Zedekiah, many people think that throne ended when he died. But back in Genesis 49, God gives, through Jacob, prophecies for his sons. Prophecies that apply to the last days. Genesis 49 verse 1 says, "Jacob called his sons and said, 'Gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days.'" What you'll be like at the end of this age of man's time on earth, the time before Jesus Christ returns. "Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father." And then he goes through one by one and tells them what they'll be like at the time of the end. We've talked about Joseph and how the modern day nations of Ephraim and Manasseh perfectly fulfill what Jacob or Israel said would befall them in the last day. But let's look at Judah, because to Judah, the promise of this throne that Jesus Christ would return to is made. Over in verse 9 of Genesis 49, well, let's pick it up in verse 8, right where he starts talking about Judah. "Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you." Judah is a lion's whelp, and even today, Judah, the tribe of Judah, carries the symbol, or the symbol, the signet of the lion. Judah is a lion's whelp. "From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. So God said to Judah, there's going to be kings come from you. And there's going to be a king that remains out of your tribe, from your lineage, from now until the return of Jesus Christ. The same thing that he prophesied as Jesus Christ was about to be conceived in Mary's womb. There will be a king that will come from you until Shiloh comes, and then he will take that throne. He will take that kingship, and he will reign forever and ever and ever. And so the story of Judah is a fascinating story. Much of the Bible talks about Judah and the lineage of the kings, the good kings, the bad kings, all through the book of Samuel, the book of Kings, the book of Chronicles. Throughout it, even into the New Testament, we know of this kingship, this line that's going to extend until the time that Jesus Christ returns. And the start of that line is interesting in its own right. If you turn back a few chapters to Genesis 38, we find the story of Judah. And it's not a really pretty picture when you look at Judah and how that lineage of kings began. Judah, I'm going to summarize the story for you here, but you can go home later and read it through in Genesis 38. It's kind of an inset chapter in Genesis that gives a very important part of the story here, of the lineage of Christ. But in Genesis 38, it talks about Judah, one of the sons of Jacob. And he had a wife. And he had 3 sons by that wife. Son number 1, named whatever we want to call him, he took a wife. He was a wicked man, God says. And the Bible says God killed him. He just was disappeared. Now you remember from ancient times when a son died and he didn't leave an heir, then the brother's responsibility was to father a child that would be in his name. His brother was Onan. Onan was also a wicked man, the Bible says, and he died. So there was one son of Judah left. His name was Shelah. And Judah was a little bit, he was young, this son Shelah, but Judah was a little bit leery, I think, of giving him, because here he has 2 sons that are killed already, as Tamar, the daughter-in-law, is waiting for the heir to be born. So he holds off on giving her Shelah. And so Tamar, who gets a little weary of waiting, decides to take matters into her own hands. She plants herself by the side of the road, portrays herself as a harlot. Judah comes by, and not in great Christian form, he decides to engage Tamar. She asks for some signs from him, or for some collateral, if you will. Give me something that I can give back to you to show that you're going to pay, I guess. And so Judah goes into her, and then she ends up pregnant. Let's pick it up in verse 24 here in Genesis 38. You have the picture painted for you, and in verse 24, it says, came to pass about 3 months after this incident with Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar, about 3 months after, that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah says, bring her out, let her be burned. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose these are, the signet and cord and staff. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she's been more righteous than I, because I didn't give her to Shelah my son. And he never knew her again. He knew whose child that was. He knew what had gone on. And here was an heir to Judah. Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth, verse 27, that behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was when she was giving birth, that one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. I guess that's how they would do that in those days. Here's the hand. Put some of the translations say a yarn, some say a string, some say a thread. Just remember red, that there was a red hand and a red symbol put on this hand of the child who came out first. His name was Zerah. She bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Verse 29, then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And the midwife said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. There'd be a separation. He was coming out first, and you took over. You kind of set him aside, and you came out first. Therefore, His name was called Perez, or Pharez, as it says in the Old King James. Afterward, his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. His name was called Zerah. So many times when you look at the beginning of a family in Israel, you have something go on at birth that really signals what's going to happen later on in life. And here we have Judah, who it's prophesied kings will come from you from now until the time that Jesus Christ returns. And here's this interesting birth of twins by a lady who is his daughter-in-law and not his wife. And they have this situation occur where one's coming out, but then the other one crowds out and takes his place. And so we have a situation where one is seen as the firstborn, but the other one is really the firstborn. And we see, as we go on, some of the tension that would carry on as a result of that. Well, Perez was the firstborn, and he's really notable in the Bible. Kings did come from him. Let's turn back to Matthew 1. Matthew 1. Matthew 1, we have the genealogy of Jesus Christ from the perspective of his physical father, Joseph, not his biological father, but his physical father, Joseph. And in Luke 3, you have his genealogy through the perspective or from the viewpoint of Mary, his biological mother. Both of them are the same. As you look through there, you're going to see that he came right through the line of David. But let's pick it up in verse 2 here of Matthew 1 and see the lineage. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And then we have Perez's line. Perez got Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Down to verse 5, Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. Obed begot Jesse. Jesse begot David the king. And then the lineage continues right on through to Jesus Christ. So we have absolutely no doubt Jesus Christ came from the line of kings exactly as God said he would. That Shiloh would come from this line of kings. And they all came through the line of Perez, who really wasn't the firstborn, perhaps in Zerah's mind, but who was the firstborn because he was the one who came out first and kind of supplanted his brother in coming out from the womb. Well, Perez's line is pretty well established. It's well known. We have chronicles of kings in all the books that I mentioned before, and he's prominently mentioned here in the line of Christ. Quite an honor. Perez, we can see, stayed with the tribe of Israel, or the nation of Israel. But what about Zerah? What happened to him? Let's go back to 1 Chronicles, because we only have one mention of this other son, whose the scarlet yarn was tied around his hand as he came out. And over at 1 Chronicles, we find a little bit about his lineage. 1 Chronicles 2. Pick it up in verse 3. Talking about the sons of Israel in verse 3, it says, the sons of Judah were Onan, and Shelah. We've talked about them. These three were born to him by the daughter of Shua, the Canaanitess. So there's Judah. He didn't even marry someone, an Israelite. He married a Canaanitess. Maybe that was the reason God wasn't going to have from Shua, this line of kings from. Here, the firstborn of Judah was wicked in the sight of the Eternal, so he killed him. And the same thing we said, as it says in Genesis, happened to Onan. And Tamar, his daughter-in-law, bore Judah, Perez, and Zerah. All the sons of Judah were 5. The sons, in verse 5, it gives you the sons of Perez, Hezron, and Hamul. And in verse 6, the sons of Zerah were Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dara, 5 of them in all. And that's the last we hear of them. We don't know from the Bible anything that happened to those 5 sons. And yet they do figure in the history of Judah. They do figure in the history of the lineage of kings. And part of the prophecy that we'll get to in a minute of God saying that throne of David would last forever. Well, what happened to those 5 sons? You can literally go online and spend the next month, I think, reading all the history about what happened to those 5 sons, what happened to Zerah. And he apparently departed from Israel sometime after the Exodus and was no longer part of it. You would think as a son of Judah that he would have been prominent there. But the history and the accepted history says he departed, and his sons departed. And as you read through, you have to wade through a lot because some of the ancient history can be cloudy in places, and some of the historians will say, we don't know exactly what happened, but as you trace the migration of people through Asia and through Europe, as you can Zerah, and you can look at the names of cities and see that Zerah and his descendants one of his descendants were in Zaragoza in Spain. The names there because people tended to name the things after themselves, just like the tribe of Dan. As they migrated through Europe, they would often rename the places after them. So you have places like Danube and London that comes from Dan. And you can see where they emigrated through. And as you read through the history books, you find that the sons of, a few of them were notable. History will say this son Dara, D-A-R-A, actually founded the city of Troy. Interesting. The city of the son Calcol, actually, some history says, founded the city of Athens. But they migrated and moved from there, and Calcol, the history will say, eventually migrated up through Europe over into the British Isles and settled in Ireland. Actually, there's a kingdom in Ireland called the Kingdom of Ulster that dates back from 1400 BC. And the history says that Calcol established the Kingdom of Ulster in Ireland around that time. Now that's the time after the Exodus. Again, ancient history can sometimes be 100 years or whatever off. One of them I was reading said, we've got to kind of look at history and fill in the blanks because nations, when they were conquered, the succeeding nation would rewrite history to write them out. So for instance, in Ireland, you do have a period of time, we'll talk about it a little bit, where God's law was taught. But when the Druids came in, they didn't want any mention of that. They wanted to forget that that was taught in Ireland. Much like we see happening today where the Germans, we hear, or sometimes in Germany, maybe even in this country, history books are rewritten so that the Holocaust doesn't look as bad as it did. And there's people who don't even want to believe the Holocaust happened during World War II, as people rewrite history. Today we have the luxury of having millions and millions of books that we can go back and actually see history. Back then you didn't. You had to rely on what you found in artifacts and written in places. And so piecing it together can be difficult. But remember the red hand, the red scarf, the red yarn. Remember Ulster. We'll come back to them a little bit later. But let's go over and look at the throne of Judah that God talked about. And look at that for a little bit because there's a covenant made with David regarding that throne that we need to examine. Let's go back to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel 7. There's many covenants in the Bible, 7 of them. The Abrahamic covenant, we are all aware of. God said, and you, all nations of the earth, will be blessed. It's a covenant that extends to today. Indeed, Jesus Christ was born through that line, so the spiritual blessings certainly came through that line. When you know who the nations, the descendants of Israel are today, you can see that in a physical sense, the world has been blessed in this end time as well by the descendants of Abraham, who God has richly blessed. But just like the nation of Jerusalem or Judah and Israel in the past, as they departed from God, they eventually lost those blessings. But let's look at 2 Samuel 7 because David was a man after God's own heart. He made some big mistakes early on in his kingship. But he turned to God. He recognized who he was. He repented with all of his heart. And then he let God lead him from then on out. And he became a different person. Over in 2 Samuel 7. 2 Samuel 7. Let's pick it up in verse 9. God here speaking to David, he says, I've been with you wherever you have gone. I've cut off all your enemies from before you, and I have made you a great name, like the name of the great men who were on the earth. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more. Well, that's an interesting statement. David may have scratched his head on that one and thought, well, we're firmly planted right here, right, in the land that you gave us, the land that you promised to us. But God says, I'll appoint a place for my people Israel, and there they will dwell. Now they'll move no more, but we'll talk about that at another time. Nor shall, he says, the sons of wickedness oppress them anymore as previously, since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and have caused you to rest from all your enemies. Also, the Eternal tells you, he will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled, and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Well, forever is always an interesting word. There are people who would tell you that when the Old Testament says forever, it just means until the time Jesus Christ came to earth and the New Testament or the New Covenant era began. But is that what God means when he says forever? You'll remember from a few Bible studies back, we talked about the word forever in conjunction with the holy days. When God says, you will keep these holy days forever in Leviticus 23. And the word forever comes from the Hebrew word olam, O-L-A-M. And olam is a pretty clear word in the Hebrew language. It means that you will keep it as long as there's a heaven and earth. As long into perpetuity as there is a heaven and earth, and we'll see that as God almost defines that word in a few verses going forward. So when we read forever, most of the time in the Old Testament, it really does mean forever. Just like Jesus Christ said in Matthew 5, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle passes from the law. I can look around, you know what? Heaven and earth are still here. So if I take Jesus Christ at his word, not one jot or one tittle has passed away. And yet the world will tell you, oh, he did away with it. But in the same sense that Jesus Christ did not do away, and the law exists forever, so when he says, your kingdom, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever, he means it. Let's go on. Verse 14, I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men, and with the blows of the sons of men. And so we see in the history of Israel and Judah, God used other nations to punish them. God stirred up the Assyrians. He's the one who, and the Assyrians punished Israel. He had the Babylonians punish Judah and conquer them. If he commits iniquity, if he turns from my law, I will chasten him with the rod of men. Verse 15, but my mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. I think God's getting his point across. The throne will be there forever. Let's go over to 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 13. Verse 5. Abijah, king of Judah, stands up and he says to the people of Israel who have separated from the kingdom of Judah that time, they are under the dominion of Jeroboam. And he says in verse 5, shouldn't you know that the eternal God of Israel gave the dominion over Israel to David forever, to him and to his sons, by a covenant of salt? Don't you know that? Don't you remember? Forever? And by a covenant of salt. Why would he say a covenant of salt? Well, if you go back into the commentaries and you remember what God would use as symbols of things back in those days, when you were offering to God, you would never offer anything with leavening on the altar of God. But some of the things you would actually season with salt. It was okay to put salt on those things. And here, Abijah talks about a covenant of salt. Salt in the Bible can mean permanence, because it's one of those preservatives that last. And so he's saying it's a permanent covenant here. a permanent covenant of salt, that David's throne would last forever. As we get into the book of Psalms, we see it specifically mentioned again. Let's go to Psalm 89 in a rather lengthy discussion of the throne of David. We have several things mentioned. Psalm 89, let's pick it up in verse 3. Psalm 89, verse 3. I've made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn to my servant David, your seed I will establish forever. O-L-A-M. And I will build up your throne to all generations. Your throne will be there for all generations. David. Let's drop down to verse 20. I have found my servant David. With my holy oil I have anointed him, with whom my hand shall be established, and my arm shall strengthen him. The enemy shall not outwit him, nor the son of wickedness afflict him. I will beat down his foes before his face, and plague those who hate him. But my faithfulness and my mercy shall be with him, and in my name his horn shall be exalted. I will set his hand over the sea, and his right hand over the rivers. He shall cry to me, you are my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. And I will make him my firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. My mercy I will keep for him forever, and my covenant shall stand firm with him. His seed I will make to endure forever, and his throne is the days of heaven. If his sons forsake my law and don't walk in my judgments, if they break my statutes and don't keep my commandments, then I will punish their transgression with the rod and their iniquity with stripes. Nevertheless, my loving kindness I will not utterly take from him, nor allow my faithfulness to fail. My covenant I will not break, nor alter the word that has gone out of my lips. Once I have sworn by my holiness, I will not lie to David. His seed shall endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me. It shall be established forever like the moon, even like the faithful witness in the sky. Any doubt that the throne of David still exists? If it doesn't still exist, we could throw the Bible away, because it is the unbreakable Word of God. And he said his throne will stand forever. As long as there's a sun, as long as there's a moon. When I woke up this morning, I saw the sun. When I walked outside, I melted in the sun. And tonight, maybe, I don't even, maybe there will be a moon out there I see or not. But it's still there. The throne exists somewhere. Over in Jeremiah 33. Jeremiah 33. Jeremiah, you'll remember his commission. He was there in the last days of Judah. Spent 40 years prophesying to those people. Turn back to God. If you don't turn from your way, he will send a kingdom from the north, Babylon, to destroy you. They will utterly destroy you. Everything will be destroyed. People will die by sword, pestilence, famine. People will be carried away captive. Jerusalem will be no more. He prophesied it. They didn't listen to it. For 40 years, he said the same message over and over and over again. No matter what God did to get their attention by whatever pantomime or action he had Jeremiah do, they just didn't listen. The same thing with Ezekiel. As he went through the various things that God had him do, laying on his side for 390 days and 40 days, doing the things that he did, the people just didn't listen. And so Jeremiah was there at a time when the king was still reigning in Judah. And yet he, who knew what was going to happen, talks about this kingship, this throne that was there. And in verse 15, he talks about, or let's begin it in verse 14, he talks about where the throne will be. Jeremiah 33 and 14. Behold, the days are coming, says the Eternal, that I will perform that good thing which I have promised to the house of Israel and to the house of Judah. That good thing. Well, Jeremiah's been talking about the bitter, right? But here's the sweet. Here's the good thing that God has been promising to the house of Israel and to the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will cause to grow up to David a branch of righteousness. He will execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell safely. And this is the name by which she will be called, the Lord our righteousness. Now he's speaking clearly of the time when Jesus Christ will come and he will take that throne. And he will sit on that throne. It's sweet. What Jeremiah was often found himself talking about was the bitter. Verse 17, for thus says the Eternal, David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel. And then he says the same thing about the priests and the Levites. Verse 19, the word of the Eternal came to Jeremiah saying, thus says God, if you can break my covenant with the day and my covenant with the night, so that there will not be day and night in their season, then my covenant may also be broken with David my servant, so that he shall not have a son to reign on his throne. And then he mentions the Levites, priests, and ministers as well. He repeats it even in the last days of Judah. The throne will survive. Jeremiah's been telling them everything is going to disappear. Your whole city is going to go down. Judah's not going to exist anymore. God says, but it won't end. It won't end. The throne won't disappear. You can mark down 2 verses you can look at later. Jeremiah 41:10, Jeremiah 43:6. It mentions king's daughters. Now, Judah didn't turn back to God. Judah continued in their way. And you know the history. Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar came in. He took one group of captives away. Daniel was in that group. Later he came back in, and Ezekiel was in the group that was carried away that time. The third time he came in, he came and he totally decimated Jerusalem. The temple was burned. The kings were decimated. Zedekiah was carried off. His eyes were put off. His sons were killed before him. The world will tell you the line of Judah ended with Zedekiah. When he died, everyone was gone. Not true. Not true. Remember the words king's daughters, because when Jeremiah was the group of people we talked about a couple weeks ago, the group of people when Judah had fallen, Jerusalem was in a mess, and they wanted to seek God. Tell us, Jeremiah, does God want us to stay here, or does he want us to flee to Egypt? Remember that? And they said, whatever God tells us to do, we'll do. God said, stay right here. Stay right here. Don't go to Egypt. And they said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to Egypt anyway. They went to Egypt. They all died. But Jeremiah and the daughters, king's daughters who went with him, didn't die. They didn't die there in Egypt. They continued to live. You see, Jeremiah had been sent on a commission. His commission that he was told back in Jeremiah 1, we can turn back there, at the end of King Zedekiah's reign, when Nebuchadnezzar came in and finally demolished Jerusalem, burned down the temple, everything was in ruin. It was over. Only part of Jeremiah's commission was done at that point. Let's notice in Jeremiah 1, verse 5. God speaking to Jeremiah says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I set you apart. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. Not just one nation, to many nations. Verse 7, the Eternal said to me, don't say I am a youth, for you shall go to all whom I send you, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. Don't be afraid of their faces, for I am with you to deliver you, says the Eternal. Then God put forth his hand and touched Jeremiah's mouth and said to him, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have this day set you over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and to pull down, to destroy and to throw down. And indeed, that is exactly what happened under Jeremiah. The kingdom was torn down. The kingdom was thrown down. Jerusalem didn't exist. The throne in Jerusalem was gone. God, because the people refused to turn back to him, that part of his commission was done. He prophesied for 40 years, and the kingdom was thrown down. But his job wasn't done yet. The last phrase says, to destroy and to throw down, to build and to plant. You'll tear it down. You'll root it up. You'll take it with you, and you will build, and you will plant. After Jeremiah and the daughters leave Egypt, We don't hear about them or read about them in the Bible anymore. The focus of the Bible is often on Jerusalem, but Jeremiah and the daughters do go off someplace else. In Ireland, we've talked about Ireland before. Calcall, one of Zerah's sons, established the kingdom of Ulster over there back around 1400 BC. The legend in Ireland is that Jeremiah went there. Now, no other nation has that legend. Britain doesn't say Jeremiah was here. Scotland doesn't say Jeremiah was here. Other nations aren't saying that. It's a legend in Ireland that Jeremiah went there after he left Egypt with the king's daughters. You can't find a history book out there that says that, though. You can't find a history book that says Jeremiah, the prophet in Jerusalem, left Egypt with the king's daughters and he settled here. And yet, we know his job was to plant. He took the kingdom, it was torn down, and he's got to plant it someplace. There's a legend in Ireland that says he took it there. We know from history that this Calcall, C-A-L-C-H-O-L, migrated along with the tribe of Dan, it appears, over to the British Isles and in Ireland. So there are a group of people that were over there. And there is a notable king in Ireland that is documented in history. His name was Olam Fadla. Notice that O-L-L-A-M is very similar to O-L-A-M that we've been talking about, that means forever, but there was a king over there known as Olam Fadla. Now, it's disputed by some historians whether he was a king or just a great leader, a very wise man who established so many things over there in Ireland. Some of the things that he established is that he organized Ireland. That before that, it was kind of a tribe that was out there, but when he came over, he taught them how to put things together. There was an organization that was there, after the manner of Moses, captains of 10, captains of 50, people that were dedicated and would move the nation forward. And the nation did prosper while Olam Fadla was there. They said that he also began a school called the School of Tara, T-A-R-A. Many of the commentaries say that that really is Torah, the school of Torah. They were taught about God. They were taught about God's law during that time by this man, Olam Fadla. He established a 7-day festival in the fall. That was the Feast of Tabernacles, called it the Feast of Torah. And during his reign, Ireland did very well. Many people say that Jeremiah was this Olam Fadla. And if you look at some of the history books, the reign of Olam Fadla coincides with the time that Jeremiah would have left Jerusalem and Egypt with the king's daughters. There is record of him also, I should say, stopping in Spain on the way, and one of the king's daughters was married to someone in Spain. She became, or her name was Skoda, and that's where Scotland came from. But other history books will say that the reign of Olam Fadla was at a different time than the time that would fit Jeremiah. In fact, they dated a little earlier than that. And there are some people out there that would say Olam Fadla certainly was a man of God, certainly knew the Bible, came over there and taught a group of people who were descended from Israel and part of Judah, because they believed they were the descendants of Zerah who had gone over there. Let me read from a poem that is documented in history about this man, Olam Fadla. Comes from Eugene O'Curry, the Book of Leinster. Olam Fadla. Olam Fadla, a furious valor, who founded the court of Olam, was the first heroic king that instituted the Feast of Tara. 40 sweet musical years he held the high sovereignty of Erin, E-R-I-N-N, the ancient name for Ireland, and it was from him, with noble pride, that the Ultonians took their name. 6 kings of valiant career of Olam's race reigned over Ireland, Erin, for 210 full years. No other person came between them. So when some historians read that, and they realize that, yes, Zerah's descendants, and there was something about the Torah being taught over there in Ireland, in this kingdom of Ulster, some even speculate that it might have been King David who went over, because some date the reign of King or Adlam Fadla at the time that David was on the throne. After all, the poem says he reigned 40 years. Now we know that David's throne wasn't in Ireland. But there is some speculation, and let me underline speculation, okay? Speculation with a capital S-P-E-C-U-L-A-T-I-O-N. That David, who was friends with King Hiram of Tyre. Now we remember King Hiram of Tyre. He was seafaring. Solomon was also friends with him. The ships went out throughout the Meridian. And that David might have visited up there in Ireland because he recognized that there was a group of Israelites that were up in that area. Now that is just May. We can't prove it. It's an interesting thought. Whether it was Jeremiah or whether it was David, God knows. The history all fits when you understand who those people were. But let me show you something that is documented. That is from the northern king, from the northern province of Ireland up there. Remember the red scarlet, the red hand on Zerah? When they left, they carried with them a red lion, and they carried the symbol of this red hand because they knew, or they felt, they were the firstborn. It had been taken from them, and so they left. Back to 1400 BC, one of the symbols of the kingdom of Ulster has been a red hand. No other country on earth has a red hand as its symbol. And if you read through the books of Ireland, there are some other ideas of where that red hand came from, of a bloody hand and whatever, but they will say it's the sons of Zerah who carried that symbol with them, and it remains to this day. A red hand. Okay? Here's the kingdom of Ulster's flag. Their flag still today. This flag has been in place, they said, since 1264. For what, 800, 750 years? The symbol of the red hand has carried through them throughout history. From the time they came, they carried that signal or that symbol with them. And today the flag still bears that red hand. This flag is no longer in existence, but prior to that one, this is the flag of the Kingdom of Ulster in Ireland. You can see the red hand still there. But you also see a crown. You also see the crown on there, right? Because they believed the crown was rightly theirs. It was Pharez who crowded out Zerah and took the place, if you will. Now, some have even pointed out, this was before the little nation of Israel was over there in the Middle East today, that this six-pointed star that the hand is enshrined in, is reminiscent of the Star of David that marks the Jewish people today. And this was far before, or long before that. So it marks the people over there who they were, who they are descendants of. Someone pointed out when I showed this in Jacksonville this morning that the crown also has 12, symbolizing, because they knew the story as well, 12, symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 points on the top of it there. So where did Jeremiah go? Again, Satan would very much like to cloud the history. And as the history books say, you can't prove it from anything documented that Jeremiah was there, but because history has been rewritten, and you have these signs that have been there, that the sons of Zerah, or one of the sons of Zerah, are over there in Ireland. Legend has it that the two daughters, one named Skoda married in someone from Spain, and that was where the name Scotland came from. But the other daughter, Teatefi, married King Heremon, Heremon, of the Zerah kingdom when Jeremiah brought her over there, thus healing a 2,500-year breach between the brothers. Interesting history. Let's go back to Ezekiel 21. Ezekiel 21. chapter before, Ezekiel 21, God talks about idolatry. He talks about keeping the Sabbath day. He challenges the people. They're not obeying the way he said in Ezekiel 21. Let's pick up the first few verses here, beginning with verse 1. It says, "The word of the Eternal came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face toward Jerusalem. Preach against the holy places, and prophesy against the land of Israel. And say to the land of Israel," remember, Israel has already been taken captive, "Thus says the Eternal, Behold, I am against you, and I will draw my sword out of its sheath, and cut off both righteous and wicked from you. Because I will cut off both righteous and wicked from you, therefore my sword shall go out of its sheath against all flesh, from south to north, that all flesh may know that I, the Eternal, have drawn my sword out of its sheath. It shall not return any more. Sigh, therefore, Son of man, with a breaking heart, and sigh with bitterness before their eyes. And it shall be when they say to you, Why are you sighing? You will answer, Because of the news. When it comes, every heart will melt. All hands will be feeble. Every spirit will faint, and all knees will be weak as water. Behold, it is coming, and shall be brought to pass, says the Lord God. And you notice it's God, that's in capitals there, G-O-D, so it's not Y-H-W-H, it's more sovereign God, or the master God, the one who we worship and follow and who is our master. Thus says the sovereign God. Down in verse 24, it says, Thus says the sovereign God, because you have made your iniquity to be remembered, and that your transgressions are uncovered, so that in all your doings your sins appear. Because you have come to remembrance, you shall be taken in hand. Now to you, O profane, wicked prince of Israel, whose day has come, whose iniquity shall end, thus says the sovereign God, remove the turban, take off the crown. Nothing shall remain the same. Exalt the humble, and humble the exalted. Now it's come down to you. Now is the time to take off the crown, O exalted one, who has had the throne, and now the other one will be exalted. And then he says in verse 27, overthrown, overthrown, I will make it overthrown. Now when God repeats things, he repeats them for a reason. He's not like the old record players where the needle will get stuck and all of a sudden you just keep hearing the same thing over and over again. When he says overthrown, overthrown, overthrown 3 times, there's a reason he says that 3 times. Just like when he says about Babylon. Babylon the Great is fallen, comma, is fallen. He isn't saying it just for emphasis, but because it happens twice. Ancient Babylon did fall, and the Babylon that is to come on this world will fall as well. Now when he says overthrown, overthrown, I will make it overthrown, he's signifying what is going to happen to that throne that is going to be taken off of one head and put on another. Because remember, the promise is the throne will last forever, and it will be Jesus Christ who takes the throne and has it from there on. He says, going on, it shall be no longer, as in it will no longer be in Jerusalem, Ezekiel. It will no longer be there until Christ comes, whose right it is, and I will give it to him. Overthrown, overthrown, overthrown. Well, I won't go into a lot of detail because you can go on and you can read until you can't read anymore about this. And you can see documented in history where the crown that was in Ireland got passed on again. So we have one overthrown. We know Jerusalem fell. We know the crown ended in Jerusalem. We know that Jeremiah's job was to plant it somewhere else. It got planted in Ireland when the king's daughter married the king, King Harriman. That's one overthrown. It got transplanted again, or overthrown again, when it was taken from Ireland to Scotland. Let me read you just a little bit from the history put together by one of the Scottish princes. His name is His Royal Highness, Prince Michael of Albany. And he did an extensive study of the history of the Scottish throne, and this is part of what he wrote. He said, Scotland's royal heritage is the oldest in Europe and can be traced back well into the BC era. The legacy of the Scots kings was hewn on the stone of destiny. You know what the stone of destiny is? That's that stone that some call Jacob's pillow. That was there, that was under the seat of the throne in Ireland, and under the seat of the throne in Scotland, under the seat of the throne in Britain, until it was transferred back to Scotland in 1996. He said it was hewn on the stone of destiny, that venerated relic of the Beth-El covenant of Genesis 28, verses 21 and 22. In about 586 BC, this stone, known as Jacob's pillow, had been brought to Ireland from Judah during the reign of King Eochaid, Eochaid, it's the same name, Harriman, of Tara. There's that word Torah again. During the reign of King Eochaid of Torah. It became the sacred fealty stone of the Irish kings and eventually performed the same office in Scotland. So it was there. After a time, the throne was overturned from Ireland to Scotland. Second, overturned. And then the third time, it was overthrown in Scotland and transferred to England, where it says the Stuart line of David had settled around 1600 in the person of James I. So we have overturned, from Jerusalem to Ireland to Scotland to England. The Irish kings were descendants of Judah. The Scottish kings were descendants of Judah. The British kings and queens know they are descendants of David. Where is the throne of David today? Where's the throne that Jesus Christ is going to return? Where's the throne he's going to take that God said will be there when he returns? You know, when you look at the British throne, and you look at the modern day world and what people think of monarchies and whatever, it's kind of amazing that that throne still exists, isn't it? It makes you wonder, why do the British people, I mean, I forget how many millions and whatever it cost them to have that throne, but they're fascinated by it. They love it. Americans love it. The whole world looks at it. It's the most visible crown on earth. And everyone looks to that royal family. They want to know every move they make. They're fascinated by them. They love that throne. Why is it in this day and age that that throne would be so visible? Why hasn't Britain said, we don't want it anymore? This is the land of the age of democracy. We don't want a king. We don't want a royal line. Why is the world fascinated by it? Only one reason. It's because the throne that Jesus Christ will return to is visible in the world today. It's there. It should help us to really focus on the return of Jesus Christ because we see what he's going to return to. God has stood through history with his purpose. His will be done. When he returns, when he sends Jesus Christ to return to his throne, he'll take it, but it won't stay in Britain. It'll stay there until he returns. Let's go over to Zechariah 1. Zechariah 1, verse 17. Again, proclaim, saying, thus says the Eternal of hosts, my cities shall again spread out through prosperity. The Eternal will again comfort Zion and will again choose Jerusalem. Speaking of the time when Jesus Christ returns. Chapter 8, Zechariah. And verse 1. Again, Zechariah writes, the word of the Eternal of hosts came saying, thus says God, I am zealous for Zion with great zeal. With great fervor I am zealous for her. I will return, verse 3, to Zion, and dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. The mountain that we hear of in Isaiah 2, that all people will come up to that mountain. All will be seeking the laws of God. All will come and want to hear God's way, God's law, and be taught it. Because they will see the effects of mankind and the slaughter and the misery that lies between us and the return of Jesus Christ, and they will want to learn the laws of peace, harmony, and all good that will come from them, and it will emanate from where Christ reigns, and that will be in Jerusalem, when the throne is taken back there. Zechariah 14. 14. Verse 8. In that day, whenever we read in that day, it's talking of the end time. In that day it shall be that living waters will flow from Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea, half of them toward the western sea. In both summer and winter it shall occur, and the Eternal shall be king over all the earth. In that day it shall be, he is one, and his name one. A great prophecy. The sweetness of the holy days, the sweetness of God's plan, Jesus Christ on earth, his government extant on the earth, people living by it, his spirit guiding people, directing people, a time of joy and peace that has never been seen on this earth from the time that Eve and Adam rejected God. When we look at the holy days, what we're going into, we focus on that time of sweetness, but we recognize the bitterness before it. But we look forward to the time that Jesus Christ returns and claims the throne that is rightfully his.